Imagine this. You're lying in bed, lights off, phone dangerously close to your face, doing that thing where you promise you'll sleep after this video. The thumbnail says, the ancient Egyptian empire. So your brain probably goes, pyramids, mummies, curses, sand, more sand, and maybe Brendan Fraser. But here's the twist. Egypt wasn't just a couple of pyramids and a guy in golden eyeliner ruling the desert like a fashion icon. It was one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. While most empires rise, flex, and fall in a few centuries, Egypt basically looked at time and said, I'm not in a hurry. So tonight we're going to watch this entire world appear, grow, fracture, reinvent itself, conquer, get conquered, and still somehow outlive everybody else in the history books. No Hollywood curses. Just 3,000 years of humans trying to keep a river, a bureaucracy, and a pantheon of very dramatic gods in balance. So get comfortable. Dim your brightness. And let's drift back to the beginning. Before the pyramids, before the pharaohs. When Egypt wasn't yet Egypt. Before there was an Egyptian empire, there was just a river. The Nile. If you zoom out on a map, the Nile Valley looks like a long, thin green ribbon tied through a vast expanse of beige. On either side, desert. Heat, rock, and the kind of landscape that makes your skin dry out just thinking about it. But along the river? Life. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile does something quietly miraculous. It floods, spills over its banks, then retreats, leaving behind a layer of dark, rich silt. Ancient Egyptians will eventually call this land Kemet, the Black Land. Not because they were Goth, but because of the black, fertile soil. No Nile, no Egypt. With the Nile, though, you get predictable farming. Reliable harvest cycles. Enough food to support more than just a handful of people staring at goats. So small villages form along the banks. People plant, harvest, worship, barter. They watch the river and the stars, trying to understand the patterns. Over generations, these little communities become local kingdoms. Dozens of them. Each with its own leader, its own little court, its own local gods. And if you've ever seen what happens when there are too many bosses in one group chat, you can guess what comes next. Competition. Arguments. Occasional violence over whose god is taller and whose field is better. But slowly, the idea of unity starts to take shape. At some point, a few of these little kingdoms say, what if instead of fighting over who's in charge, we just make one big thing and argue inside it? Welcome to the concept of a state. Around 3100 BCE, a ruler in southern Egypt, Upper Egypt, rises to the top of this food chain. We usually call him Narmer. He marches north, conquers or absorbs the Delta region, Lower Egypt, and does something bold. He fuses them. 2 lands, 2 crowns, 1 king. He puts the crowns together, white for Upper Egypt, red for Lower Egypt, into one double crown, basically the ancient version of yes, I do run the entire thing, thanks. This moment, real or polished by legend, becomes the starting gun for dynastic Egypt. From now on, the king is not just a strong man with soldiers. He is the pivot between heaven and earth, the gods and the people, the Nile's flood and the harvest. The Egyptians will call him Nisibiti, Pharaoh, Great House. He's not just ruling, he's anchoring cosmic order, Ma'at. Ma'at is one of the key words in this entire story. It means order, balance, justice, the right way of things. The sun rising, the Nile flooding, harvest succeeding, judges being fair, people not stabbing each other too often, all of that is Ma'at. And the king's job? Keep it that way. No pressure. We roll into what historians call the Old Kingdom, roughly 2686 to 2181 BCE. If Egypt was a TV show, this is the iconic early season everyone remembers. This is the Pyramid Age. At first, royal tombs are flat, rectangular mounds called mastabas. Then a king named Djoser thinks bigger. He hires an architect, Imhotep. Not as a mummy, not with bad CGI, but as a genius engineer and high official. Imhotep stacks mastabas on top of each other like someone who misunderstood, keep it simple, and creates the step pyramid of Saqqara. It's one of the earliest massive stone structures in the world. Not a smooth pyramid yet, but the idea is there. If you are a god king, you should not be buried in something that looks like a slightly raised rectangle. Over the next generations they tweak the design. They experiment with angles, stability, how not to accidentally make giant rock slide of doom, instead of eternal monument. Eventually, during the 4th dynasty, we reach the stars. The Great Pyramids of Giza. Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. Khafre, his slightly smaller pyramid, and the Sphinx. Menkaure, the smallest of the 3 big Giza pyramids. These aren't only graves. They are stone sermons about The king's power. The state's organization. The belief that the king will become one with the gods in the afterlife. And the idea that when Pharaoh says, "I need a legacy," everybody else's schedule just became irrelevant. To build them you need tens of thousands of workers, probably seasonal farmers during the flood months, not chains of whipped slaves from Hollywood casting. A logistics system that can move enormous limestone blocks. Food supplies, tools, copper chisels, ropes, sledges. And an absolutely obsessive belief that this is worth doing. Why does society accept that level of investment? Because in their worldview, if the king is properly buried, properly transformed, properly merged with the gods, then Maat stays stable. If the king is neglected, if the rituals fail, if the order falls apart, you don't just lose a leader. You risk breaking the cosmic circuit. So in a way, those pyramids are giant stone backup batteries for the universe. For a while, the Old Kingdom is peak Egyptian stability. The Nile keeps flooding. The central government is strong. Officials carve smug autobiographies into their tomb walls about how fair and generous they were, and how absolutely no one ever complained about their administration, ever. But as always, the cracks appear slowly. Over time, local governors, nomarchs, grow more powerful in their districts. Tax and labor systems strain under the weight of big projects. A few Nile floods are poor, leading to famine and unrest. Some kings are weaker, minors, or short-lived. When things go wrong in Egypt, they don't just blame politics. They blame a breakdown of Maat. There's an eerie literary text from later periods that imagines what happens when order collapses. The rich become poor. The poor seize things by force. Rivers run with blood. Foreigners are everywhere. It reads like someone's ancient fever dream of everything is upside down. Whether or not it literally matches real events, it shows the fear. If the center weakens, the entire world unravels. Eventually, the Old Kingdom fractures into a mess historians politely call the First Intermediate Period, which is a nice way of saying multiple power centers, kings competing, local dynasties, less giant stone, more local survival mode. Egypt is still there. But the single, unified pyramid-building machine? On pause. Out of that chaos, a kingdom in Thebes, in southern Egypt, slowly pushes its way to the top again. A ruler named Mentuhotep II reunifies Egypt around 2050 BC, kicks off what we call the Middle Kingdom. If the Old Kingdom was Egypt's flexing with pyramids phase, the Middle Kingdom is its anxious introspection and good literature phase. Now we see more realistic art in some statues. Texts about loyalty, exile, and fear of disorder. Kings presenting themselves as shepherds of their people, not just remote sun gods on a platform. One famous story, the tale of Sinuh, follows a courtier who flees Egypt after the king dies, lives in exile, and eventually returns to be forgiven and buried properly in his homeland. It's basically, what if being away from Egypt is the worst possible thing, even if you have a nice life elsewhere? The Middle Kingdom rulers fortify Egypt's southern borders. Build irrigation and fortresses in Nubia. Keep a close eye on trade and resources. Make sure grain keeps flowing and Maat stays mostly intact. They don't build pyramids as gigantic as Giza, but they focus on functioning as wise, just rulers in an unpredictable world. And then again we hit the turbulence. By the time we slide into the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt's grip loosens, especially in the Delta. Into that vacuum come people from Western Asia, later lumped under the name Hyksos. They don't arrive in one dramatic invasion. They seep in over time. Traders, mercenaries. They bring with them new types of weapons, horse-drawn chariots, different fortification styles, fresh ideas for messing up your neighbor from a distance. At some point, one Hyksos dynasty controls much of northern Egypt, ruling from avarice. In the south, in Thebes, Egyptian rulers still hold power. So again the land is split. Hyksos kings in the north, native kings in the south who are very much not fans of this arrangement. Steadily, conflict escalates. We even have letters from a Theban king complaining that the Hyksos ruler is sending rude messages about hippopotamuses. Ancient diplomacy, still petty. Eventually, under a Theban prince who becomes Ahmose I, Egypt fights back hard. He besieges Hyksos strongholds, pushes them out, and eventually reunites Egypt. And this time he and his successors look at foreign threats and think, we are done waiting for trouble to cross the border. We're going to go out there. Welcome to the New Kingdom, Egypt's most aggressively imperial phase. Now Egypt doesn't just sit in its nice river valley hoping others behave. It becomes a superpower. Kings like Thutmose I, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep II march into Nubia in the south, Canaan and Syria in the northeast. They fight battles like Megiddo, where Thutmose III executes one of the most impressive early recorded military campaigns, complete with a risky surprise march through a narrow pass, surrounding a coalition of enemy princes, then inscribing the whole thing in a temple like an ancient flex. Look how clever I am. Also, don't try this. Egypt doesn't always directly annex every territory. Sometimes they leave local rulers in place, demand tribute, take hostages, foster sons, raised at the Egyptian court, install garrisons and officials. From their perspective, Egypt is the parent state. Everyone else is, generously speaking, junior. Gold flows in, especially from Nubia. Foreign luxuries arrive. Exotic woods, horses, lapis lazuli, incense, strange animals. Temples get bigger. Palaces get fancier. Royal tombs move from giant pyramids into hidden cliff-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings, decorated with stars, spells, and guides to the afterlife. If the old kingdom shouted power in broad daylight with pyramids, the new kingdom paints power in darkness, deep underground. Then comes something unexpected. In the middle of all this imperial glory, a pharaoh decides the gods need a radical update. His original name, Amenhotep IV. He later renames himself Akhenaten. Most kings respect the established religious order. Ammonius of Thebes, Re the sun god, Osiris, lord of the dead. A whole satisfying roster of deities with specific jobs and animal heads. Akhenaten looks at this system and says, what if, instead, we focus almost entirely on Aten, the visible sun disk, life-giver, and we change literally everything? He promotes Aten above all other gods, moves the capital to a brand new city, Akhetaten, modern Amarna, redirects temple wealth, encourages a new art style, elongated heads, tender family scenes, the king and queen shown under rays ending in tiny hands. To some this looks like early monotheism or at least henotheism, one god above the rest. To others it looks like a king shoving aside old institutions to centralize power. To the priesthood of Ammonius and the old temples? It looks like unemployment. Meanwhile, the empire's foreign affairs are not thriving. Vassal rulers in Syria and Canaan send letters. We still have them in cuneiform tablets, saying, Dear Pharaoh, hope all is well. Small question, our enemies are attacking. Could you please send troops before we are all extremely dead? The answers are delayed or insufficient. Akhenaten seems more focused on his sun disk and his ideal city than on the fraying imperial net. After he dies, chaos. Short-lived kings. A boy king, probably related, takes the throne, Tutankhaten, who quietly becomes Tutankhamun. His job isn't to innovate, it's to undo the innovation. Under his advisors, the capital moves back. Aten's cult is reduced. Ammonius and the other gods regain their central place. Temples are restored. Official inscriptions pretend the old order was briefly neglected by some unnamed person we are definitely not mentioning. Tutankhamun dies young. His tomb, small by royal standards, ends up being nearly intact when it's found in 1922, turning him into the world's most famous minor king. Because that's how history works sometimes. You can build giant monuments, rule for 60 years and be a footnote. Or die young with a cluttered storage room tomb, and boom, global celebrity. After the Amarna detour, Egypt tries to get back on track. We get a line of kings who emphasize tradition, military strength, piety toward the old gods. One of the most famous, Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great. He rules for something like 66 years. He fights at the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, one of the great powers of the region. The actual battle? From what we can piece together, messy, chaotic, arguably a draw. Ramesses, in his inscriptions, gives us the deluxe heroic edition. He is ambushed. His army is in trouble. He heroically charges alone into the enemy. Everyone else is basically useless. He single-handedly saves the day. It's the ancient world's equivalent of that friend who tells one story at every party and somehow gets more heroic every year. Eventually, Ramesses signs a peace treaty with the Hittites, one of the earliest surviving international treaties, and even marries a Hittite princess. At home he builds huge additions to temples, constructs new ones, carves his name on so many monuments that scholars sometimes joke. If you don't know who built it, just assume it was Ramesses II. He'd like that. His colossal statues, like those at Abu Simbel, scream one message. I'm not small. Remember me. And for a long time Egypt is still a big deal. But an empire is like a very large, very expensive plant. If you stop watering it with money, manpower, attention, it doesn't die instantly. It droops. It becomes vulnerable. After Ramesses II, the new kingdom starts fraying. Successors have shorter reigns. Foreign threats multiply. Groups later labeled the Sea Peoples raid and disrupt coastal regions. Internal corruption grows. Economy struggles. Temples accumulate land and power, sometimes rivaling the throne. By Ramesses III's time, Egypt is fighting defensive battles just to hold its own. He manages some impressive victories, but even he faces internal conspiracy, literally an assassination attempt recorded in the Harem Conspiracy Papyrus. Eventually, by the end of the New Kingdom, the pattern returns. Local power bases grow. Royal authority weakens. The state splits. We enter the third intermediate period. In the north, pharaohs ruling from the delta. In the south, powerful high priests of Ammonius controlling Thebes and much of Upper Egypt. Later, Libyan chieftains become kings. Kushite Nubian rulers from the south come in, form their own dynasty as pharaohs, and try to reunify the land. It's no longer the golden, unified empire dominating the region. But here's the key thing. Egyptian culture doesn't disappear. The writing, rituals, gods, art styles, royal ideas, they adapt, shift, merge with new influences, but they don't just evaporate. It's like a song that keeps getting remixed by every new DJ who conquers the club. Now zoom out again. While Egypt is juggling internal rulers, other empires are rising around it. To the northeast, the Assyrians, brutal and efficient. Then the Neo-Babylonians. Then the giant multi-ethnic machine of the Persian Empire. To them, Egypt isn't a distant legend. It's a rich, fertile, strategically crucial region. The Persians, under Cambyses II, conquer Egypt around 525 BCE. Egypt becomes a satrapy, a province, in the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Persian kings present themselves as pharaohs in official Egyptian contexts. They perform temple rituals, hire Egyptian priests, carve inscriptions and hieroglyphs. Outwardly, it's nothing to see here. Continuity. Same divine order. Different, administrative oversight. Inwardly, of course, things change. Some Egyptians resent foreign rule. Some elites adapt and cooperate. Revolts flare up from time to time. The thing about Egypt is, conquering it militarily is one thing. Conquering its identity is another. Even when ruled by Persians, later by Greeks, then by Romans, the image of Egypt as a land of ancient wisdom and sacred order remains powerful. So powerful that foreign rulers happily wrap themselves in it. Then from the far north, from Macedon, a new storm sweeps in. Alexander the Great. By the time he reaches Egypt in 332 BCE, he has already smashed Persian armies in Asia Minor, taken Syria and Palestine, punched straight through the empire that ruled Egypt. When he enters Egypt, he's welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. He visits the oracle at Siwa Oasis, where priests tell him what many conquerors like to hear. You are chosen. You are special. The gods approve. He is portrayed in Egyptian style as a pharaoh, son of Ammonius. Alexander doesn't stay long. He leaves to go conquer half of Asia as one does. After he dies, his empire is sliced up among his generals. One of them, Ptolemy, takes Egypt. He doesn't just govern it. He makes it his kingdom. Thus begins the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers of Egypt who try to wear two hats. Greek monarchs, heirs of Alexander. Egyptian pharaohs, keepers of Ma'at. They build a new capital, Alexandria, a city on the Mediterranean, with a legendary lighthouse, the Pharos, with the Library of Alexandria and the Mouseion, centers of scholarship, with a cosmopolitan population, Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, others. Religion gets hybrid. Greek gods and Egyptian gods blend. You get syncretic deities like Serapis. Temples continue in traditional style in the countryside. Greek-style cults and philosophies flourish in cities. The rulers carve themselves on temple walls in pharaonic style, making offerings to Horus, Osiris, Isis. At the same time, they mint coins with Greek profiles and Greek legends. Outwardly, for the Egyptian-speaking majority, continuity. In court politics, for the Greek elite, royal dramas that make soap operas look underwritten. At the very end of this line stands Cleopatra VII. Not the only Cleopatra, but the one history turned into the Cleopatra. She's Macedonian Greek by descent. But unlike many of her predecessors, she learns Egyptian, embraces pharaonic imagery, positions herself as a goddess queen, often associated with Isis. Her world is dominated by a new superpower, Rome. Rome, which started as a small city-state, has now eaten Italy, Carthage, much of Spain, Greece, Asia Minor, parts of the eastern Mediterranean, and it very much has its eye on Egypt. Cleopatra navigates this by forming alliances that also double as legendary scandals. First with Julius Caesar, visiting him in Rome, having a child with him. After his assassination with Mark Antony, one of Rome's top power players. To her supporters, she's fighting for Egypt's autonomy in a Roman-dominated world. To her Roman enemies, she becomes the perfect villain. Eastern queen. Seducer. Threat to Roman values. Convenient scapegoat for deeper political conflicts. After the naval defeat at Actium in 31 BCE, Cleopatra and Antony's position collapses. They die, by suicide according to tradition. Octavian, Caesar's heir, takes Egypt. He becomes Augustus, first emperor of Rome. Egypt is no longer a kingdom. It becomes his personal province, a kind of imperial crown jewel. Grain from the Nile will help feed Rome for centuries. The ancient Egyptian empire, as an independent political force, is gone. But the story doesn't end there. Because Egypt does something almost no other empire manages. It dies politically, and then lives forever in everyone else's imagination. To the Greeks, Egypt was older, wiser. The land of ancient wisdom, sacred geometry, mysterious priests. To the Romans, Egypt was exotic, sensual, a place of strange gods and ancient magic, and also a practical granary. Later, to medieval and Renaissance Europe, Egypt becomes a symbol of hidden knowledge, alchemical secrets, hieroglyphs imagined as mystical symbols instead of a writing system. In the 19th century, when Napoleon's campaign and subsequent scholars bring Egyptian monuments, inscriptions, and artifacts to wider European attention, a new wave begins, Egyptomania. Obelisks get shipped and planted in capital cities. Museums fill with mummies, statues, tomb goods. Artists, architects, and occultists obsess over Egyptian style. And through all that, the basic outline of the story remains. A civilization built along a single river, with an obsession for order, a love of stone, and a belief that death is not an end but a transformation. Even the language of ancient Egyptian, lost for centuries, is unlocked in the 1800s by Jean-François Champollion using the Rosetta Stone, which had the same text in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Suddenly we can hear ancient Egyptians again. Their prayers, their jokes, their complaints about work, their love letters, their self-promoting tomb biographies. Not just monuments talking down at us, but voices talking with us. So what is the ancient Egyptian empire, really? It's easy to say. Pyramids, pharaohs, mummies, hieroglyphs. But underneath those symbols there's a pattern. A civilization that survived for over 3,000 years. By constantly negotiating with three forces. Nature, the Nile's rhythm, the desert's threat. Power, kings, priests, officials, conquerors. Meaning, gods, Ma'at, life after death. It wasn't just one empire. It was a long series of experiments in how to hold a society together. Unite many small kingdoms into one state. Build god-kings and pyramids. Watch it crack, then rebuild with wiser kings. Expand into an empire abroad. Try a radical religious revolution, then panic and reverse it. Fight to keep borders while the world changes. Get conquered and then conquered again, but leave an imprint so deep that even conquerors convert themselves into pharaohs on stone walls. Egypt reminds us that rise and fall is not a simple curve. It's more like a heartbeat. Down. Crisis, recovery. Innovation, backlash. Glory, fragmentation. Again and again and again. And at each stage real people lived there. Farmers watching the Nile, praying it would rise just enough. Scribes hunched over papyrus, cursing their homework. Priests timing rituals to stars. Soldiers marching into lands they'd never heard of. Children running past monuments that were already ancient to them. To them, it wasn't ancient Egypt. It was just home. So as you drift towards sleep and the mental image of golden masks and silent pyramids passes through your mind, remember this. For 3,000 years, on that narrow green strip along the Nile, people woke up, worked, worried, loved, joked, worshipped, and died. Under a sky full of gods and a calendar full of floods. Empires after them crashed and burned in a fraction of that time. But Egypt stayed. Long enough that we're still whispering about it now. Thousands of years later. On a glowing screen. In the dark. And somewhere in that desert, giant stones still sit in the moonlight, doing what they were built to do. Outlast absolutely everyone.